Rich billionaire brings Mistress to his mansion, then his pregnant wife walks in. A gilded gate creaks open to reveal the sprawling estate of Christopher Morgan, a place where secrets lurk in the corridors and the clang of champagne glasses can't drown out the echoes of betrayal. Tonight, that betrayal takes center stage. Rumors swirl that Christopher, a self-made millionaire hailed as a pillar of high society, has been harboring a dark secret in the form of a captivating mistress, Vanessa Summers. But just as the clock strikes midnight, a car pulls into the circular driveway. The unsuspecting wife, Emily Morgan, arrives home early from her charity gala, only to find the unthinkable unfolding in her very own living room. Christopher Morgan's life was a study in success. At 37, he had already built Morgan Capital Investments, from a modest one-room office to a multi-floor headquarters towering over the heart of New York City. It all seemed too good to be true. The tabloids called him the Midas Man, for every deal he touched seemed to turn into gold. Wealth, status, and power. They all arrived at Christopher's doorstep before he was old enough to taste the bitterness of failure. He wasn't born into money, rather. He fashioned his fortune from grit and cunning. Son of a struggling mechanic, he spent countless nights in an old trailer, the metallic smell of engine oil never leaving his nostrils. One day, he vowed to create a life that would make the concept of financial insecurity a distant memory. When Christopher married Emily Harrington, then a rising star in the philanthropic world, beloved for her gentle soul and her tireless devotion to children's health charities, the tabloids had a field day. They hailed them as the perfect couple, blending humble origins with philanthropic aspirations. Their engagement was a swirl of champagne and well-wishes, their wedding a spectacle of white roses and all the city's dignitaries. For years, Christopher and Emily's marriage sparkled like a perfectly cut diamond. Their love story was the envy of Manhattan's elite. Emily brought a warmth and sincerity that softened Christopher's sometimes ruthless business persona. She believed in giving to those less fortunate, and Christopher made sure her causes received generous donations. Behind the high walls of the Morgan mansion in Westchester, however, the cracks had begun to show. Christopher was traveling more, spending late nights at the office, and soon enough, Emily had grown used to sleeping alone. She believed him at first because she wanted to. After all, he was forging a financial empire, and she was proud of him. But time and distance became an invisible wedge that drove them apart, leaving Emily to wonder if she truly knew the man she had married. Signs of trouble emerged in subtle ways. Christopher was more protective of his phone. The staff whispered behind closed doors. Emily, for her part, tried to remain steadfast and gracious. She had always believed a good wife trusts her husband, especially one who had worked so hard and achieved so much. If something was amiss, she told herself, she would sense it. But sometimes, when you're desperate to keep love alive, your mind constructs comfortable illusions. Thus, the Morgan mansion went on with its carefully curated facade. Gardeners trimmed the hedges into pristine shapes. Chefs prepared lavish meals for the parties. Emily threw for her favorite charities. The nights, though, echoed with emptiness. Vanessa Summers was not born into the same circles as Christopher. She had grown up in a cramped apartment with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. But Vanessa was ambitious. With cunning and charm, she maneuvered her way up the social ladder. She learned how to make men listen, how to command attention. She first met Christopher Morgan at a gala Emily had organized for the Harrington Foundation. Vanessa was there as a guest of a well-known media mogul. She wore a red silk gown that draped around her figure like molten fire. It was, as many noticed, the boldest dress in the room. Even more daring was the way she glided through the crowd, unafraid to flirt with the city's richest men. When Christopher's eyes settled on her, something inside him stirred. They exchanged polite pleasantries, initially nothing more than fleeting flirtation. Vanessa recognized Christopher's name, who hadn't heard of Morgan Capital Investments. She allowed her gaze to linger a moment too long on him, just enough to spark curiosity. Christopher, though married, could not deny the magnetic pull. It wasn't an instant moral failing, nor was it purely lust. It was the whisper of temptation, a curiosity about what lay beyond the perfect facade he and Emily had curated. Vanessa was like a shimmering invitation to a world he had not explored, a place where caution and ethics were overshadowed by desire and secrecy. They parted that evening, but the memory of her smile haunted Christopher's sleep. He tried to dismiss it as a passing fancy, telling himself that he loved Emily. But business brought them together again. Vanessa managed to find her way into a conversation about venture capital. She demonstrated a keen understanding of the financial world enough to catch Christopher's professional interest. Or so he told himself. Their interactions continued under the guise of discussing potential partnerships. A meeting at a sleek lounge on the Upper East Side turned into a second meeting at a private wine bar. By the third meeting, Christopher found himself at a penthouse suite that Vanessa had discreetly rented. One evening, as the city lights glittered beneath them, the line that separated them from wrongdoing dissolved. What began as a clandestine affair soon blossomed into something more complex. For Christopher, Vanessa was an escape from a life that felt stifling. He was seduced by the sense of danger, the thrill of a well-kept secret. For Vanessa, Christopher represented everything she had ever wanted: power, prestige, and the promise of a luxurious life. They formed their own bubble of secrecy, a world of whispered phone calls, coded text messages, and hurried rendezvous. Initially, it was enough to keep these visits confined to the penthouse or exclusive hotels. But as the affair deepened, Christopher grew bolder. Vanessa demanded more attention, more access to his world. And it was in a moment of reckless indulgence that Christopher offered to bring her to the Morgan mansion while Emily was away at a charity event. The Morgan mansion was a sprawling testament to Christopher's wealth. A winding driveway led to a grand foyer with polished marble floors and a chandelier imported from Italy. Expansive windows overlooked manicured gardens that seemed to stretch for acres. Emily was frequently away on philanthropic business. The staff had grown used to her comings and goings. Christopher assured Vanessa that no one would question a visitor. He was the master of the house, after all. So one evening, when Emily was due at a 3-day gala in Europe, Christopher decided to host Vanessa under his own roof. Vanessa arrived in a sleek black car. She wore a designer coat that Christopher had bought her as a gift. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she stepped into the foyer. A butler greeted her cordially, having been instructed by Christopher not to mention this visit to anyone else in the household. Money, of course, smoothed over any moral qualms. She was entranced by the marble staircases and the statues that lined the hall, each piece more exquisite than the last. A soft hush seemed to settle over the mansion as she ventured deeper inside, as though the walls themselves were holding a secret. The entire place stood as a trophy for Christopher's triumphs. For a brief moment, Vanessa felt a pang of envy for Emily. This was the life she wanted, the lavish comfort, the sense of belonging in high society's most envied circles. Christopher, sensing her awe, wrapped an arm around her waist and whispered, "This is just the beginning." Yet even in that moment, an undercurrent of tension stirred. The staff exchanged knowing glances. Some were loyal to Emily, who had always treated them with kindness, remembering birthdays and personal details. Perhaps they would not betray Christopher outright, but they whispered among themselves, uneasy about what was unfolding. Christopher and Vanessa dined in the mansion's private dining room, a setting that had, until then, been a backdrop to Emily's elegant charity dinners. The long mahogany table was set with fine china. A private chef prepared lobster bisque, filet mignon, and a dessert so decadent that it felt almost sinful. Vanessa giggled as she sipped on champagne, the bubbles dancing in her throat, urging her to forget the moral lines she'd crossed. After dinner, Christopher gave her a tour of the estate, the library filled with rare books, the indoor pool that shimmered under soft lights, and the veranda that overlooked an expansive garden. It was a world that promised endless possibilities. All seemed perfect until the household phone rang. The ring was jarring in the quiet halls. One of the staff answered, only to inform Christopher that Emily's flight from Europe had been delayed. She would be returning early the very next evening. Alarm flickered across Christopher's face, but he brushed it off. They still had tonight. He simply wouldn't invite Vanessa back the following day. But fate has a way of unraveling the best laid plans. And so, with unwavering arrogance, Christopher assumed he had everything under control. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Emily Morgan was not simply returning early. She was in a fragile state of mind. The gala in Paris had been a whirlwind of fashion shows, cocktail receptions, and philanthropic planning. The intense schedule left her exhausted. To make matters worse, she had caught wind of a rumor that Christopher was seen around town with a mysterious woman. Her friend, Beatrice Williams, a socialite with a reputation for blunt honesty, had dropped hints. At first, Emily dismissed it. Christopher was often out meeting clients. It was part of his job. Yet a persistent unease gripped her heart. She tried to focus on the cause she was supporting, raising funds for pediatric cancer research, but the rumor gnawed at her. When her flight was cancelled due to an airline strike, a stroke of luck, or perhaps fate, had her booking another flight that arrived a full day earlier. Tired and anxious, Emily decided she wouldn't announce her early arrival. She wanted to surprise Christopher and see if she could dispel this dreadful rumor once and for all. The thought of potential infidelity had never truly seemed plausible. Christopher was her rock, her partner, her best friend, or so she believed. She needed proof that her marriage was solid, that the rumors were baseless. Landing at JFK at dusk, she took a hired car back to the mansion. Her phone was nearly dead. She had forgotten to pack the right charger. No matter. It was a quiet drive, giving her time to reflect on the years she had spent with Christopher. She remembered their laughter, their shared dreams, the times they had whispered about starting a family someday. She was only 32, there was still time, yet she also recalled the coldness that had taken hold in recent months, the unspoken tension, the late-night absences. As the car approached the familiar gilded gates, Emily felt her heart flutter with both excitement and dread. She pictured Christopher's face lighting up with surprise. She told herself it would be a happy reunion, but the moment the mansion came into view, a strange stillness settled over her. For some inexplicable reason, the place felt off. The lights that glowed from the second-floor windows were not the usual ones Emily left on. She noticed a sleek black car parked in the circular driveway, one she did not recognize. Could it be a new business associate? She convinced herself that everything was fine. Gathering her luggage, she paid the driver and headed toward the door. The staff, upon seeing her, seemed startled. A few of them exchanged anxious glances. Emily tried to ignore it, attributing it to her unexpected arrival. But the real shock awaited her inside. She stepped through the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The faint sound of laughter drifted from the drawing room. A female laugh light, melodious, undeniably not her own. Emily's pulse quickened as she followed the sound. She paused before entering, her heart pounding. When she finally pushed open the double doors, the scene that greeted her would forever be etched into her memory. Christopher, standing by the fireplace, one arm casually draped around the waist of a woman with flowing dark hair, clad in a designer dress that clung to her curves. There, in Emily's sanctuary, her home was her husband gazing intimately into the eyes of a stranger. Time seemed to slow. Emily felt as if she were watching a twisted tableau that belonged to someone else's life. Christopher froze, his face turning ashen the moment he laid eyes on his wife. Vanessa, too, stiffened, her confident posture faltering into uncertainty. The crackling of the fireplace suddenly felt deafening in the silence. Emily dropped her bags, the sound echoing against the marble floor. "Christopher?" she whispered, her voice catching. Christopher opened his mouth, but no words came out. Vanessa recovered first, stepping forward with a brazen tilt to her chin, as though preparing to stake her claim. Emily, however, raised a trembling hand. "Don't you dare," she said, voice quivering between heartbreak and fury. Through the swirl of disbelief, anger, and humiliation, a flood of questions assailed Emily's mind. How long had this been going on? Who was this woman? Was everything they had built a lie? She desperately wanted to scream, to lash out, but an eerie calm settled over her. She fixed her gaze on Christopher, who remained rooted to the spot. "Emily," he finally managed. I didn't expect you back tonight." An incredulous, humorless laugh escaped Emily's lips. Clearly, Vanessa flicked a glance at Christopher, her eyes full of challenge. She seemed to be weighing whether to shrink back or assert her dominance. She chose the latter. "So you're Emily," she said, her tone bold. Emily stared at Vanessa as though seeing through her. "And you are?" Christopher stepped between them. "Let's not do this now. We can talk privately, Emily." "Privately?" Emily's voice rose, cracking with pent-up emotion. "Christopher, you brought your mistress into our home. There's no privacy left." The staff, drawn by the commotion, lingered in the hallway. Emily could sense them watching, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. She suddenly realized the depth of Christopher's betrayal wasn't merely physical. It was an assault on her dignity, her sense of self, and everything she believed her marriage represented. Vanessa, her bravado firmly in place, said, "I think I should go. We can talk later, Christopher." "Don't move," Emily commanded, surprising everyone. Her eyes blazed with a ferocity that made Vanessa pause. "If you think I'm going to let you waltz out of here without an explanation, you're mistaken." Christopher placed a hand on Emily's arm, but she shrugged him off. "How could you do this?" she demanded, turning on him. "To me, to us? What happened to vows, to loyalty?" Christopher ran a hand through his hair, his composure unraveling. "It's complicated," he mumbled, which only fanned the flames of Emily's anger. "Complicated," she repeated, her voice dripping with bitterness. "It's actually quite simple. You're cheating on me, Christopher. In our own home." Vanessa cleared her throat. "Look, if you want an explanation, you stay out of this," Emily snapped, the tears in her eyes belying the strength in her tone. "I'm talking to my husband." But Vanessa wasn't one to shrink. "He's not just your husband anymore," she retorted, a trace of defiance creeping into her words. "He's made choices." Emily's fury rose like a tidal wave. In that instant, she loathed the arrogance of this woman who dared to speak about Christopher as though Emily was the intruder. She was tempted to lunge at Vanessa, to slap the smugness off her face, but she kept control for now. "Emily," Christopher began, "I never wanted you to find out this way." Emily's laugh was hollow. "Oh, really? And how exactly did you want me to find out? A phone call from a friend? A headline in the gossip pages?" His silence said more than he ever could. "Tell me," Emily pressed, "was any of this real, or were we just a stepping stone to whatever new thrill you wanted?" Christopher stared at her, heartbreak mingling with guilt in his eyes. "I never stopped caring about you, it's just that things changed." Emily sensed a well of heartbreak threatening to swallow her, but she refused to let it. "Get out," she whispered, voice shaking. "Emily, please," I said, "get out." she screamed, the dam of her emotions finally bursting. She turned on Vanessa, tears streaming down her face. Both of you, out of this room, out of this house. I don't care where you go, but don't you dare taint this place any further. Vanessa tried to speak, but a stern look from Christopher silenced her. He gently guided her to the door, casting one last glance at Emily over his shoulder. In that moment, Emily saw a flicker of regret in his eyes, but it was drowned out by a wave of betrayal that slammed into her heart like a wrecking ball. They left, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. Emily sank to her knees, the weight of her shattered illusions pressing down on her. This mansion, once her pride and joy, felt like a mausoleum for a marriage that might already be dead. In the hours following Christopher and Vanessa's departure, Emily sat on the living room floor, numb with shock. She felt the cold marble beneath her fingertips as she tried to ground herself in reality. Everything was in chaos. Her perfect world had evaporated like morning fog under the sun's relentless gaze. Eventually, she stood and found her way to the master bedroom. Memories lay everywhere, photographs of their honeymoon, gifts Christopher had given her over the years, love notes scribbled in a rush. She found herself questioning every moment, wondering if any of it had been genuine or if the love she thought she had was just a story she told herself. She dialed her best friend, Beatrice Williams, but the call went to voicemail. She left a message, voice trembling. "B, I need you." "Christopher, there's another woman." She hung up and slumped on the bed, hugging a pillow as if it could offer comfort. The night stretched on, and Emily's thoughts ran wild. She replayed the confrontation, analyzing each second like a detective. She was desperate for answers. How long had this been going on? Why had Christopher changed so drastically? Where did the line between love and betrayal begin? Anxious and restless, she combed through Christopher's belongings, searching for any sign of how deep the deceit ran. In his study, she found credit card receipts for luxurious restaurants she had never visited, expensive jewelry that never ended up in her possession, and bizarrely, a hotel key card tucked away in a drawer. Her heart wrenched with each discovery. A sudden wave of anger swept over her. She tossed Christopher's business files across the room, the pages scattering like broken promises. Part of her wanted to destroy everything associated with him, but she also realized she might need evidence for a divorce, for retribution, or simply for closure. She spent the night pacing the mansion, fueled by a storm of emotions that alternated between rage and heartbreak. At dawn, she collapsed into an armchair by the window, too exhausted to cry anymore. She watched the sun rise over the perfectly manicured gardens, and it struck her how everything outside looked so serene while her own life was falling apart. A knock on the door broke her trance. It was one of the household staff, Margaret, who had been with Emily's family for years long before Emily married Christopher. Margaret's expression was one of deep concern. She placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Miss Morgan," Margaret said softly, "I'm so sorry. We suspected something was off, but we didn't know how to tell you." Emily let out a ragged sigh. "You did the best you could. None of this is your fault." Margaret hesitated, then offered a comforting cup of tea. Emily realized how parched she was, her throat raw from a night of turmoil. She took the cup, grateful for even the smallest kindness in a storm of betrayal. "Thank you," she whispered, tears threatening again. Margaret gave her a sympathetic nod and left quietly, leaving Emily with her thoughts. She knew she couldn't hide forever. Questions needed answers, but Christopher had vanished into the night with his mistress. Still, Emily had to find a way forward, even if it meant confronting the ugly truth. Vanessa Summers was far from apologetic about the confrontation. For years she had fought tooth and nail to rise from her modest beginnings to the pinnacle of society. She had dated wealthy men before, but Christopher Morgan was different. He had the potential to be her golden ticket. However, The confrontation at the mansion had not gone as smoothly as she had hoped. Even though Emily was clearly shattered, Vanessa had left the scene feeling unsettled. She wasn't used to facing the scorn of a wife who fought back. In Vanessa's experience, wives either kept quiet or walked away meekly. Emily's fury had been raw, and it made Vanessa uneasy. Christopher insisted that they leave immediately, so they drove to a penthouse suite. He occasionally rented for business associates. There, Vanessa tried to coax Christopher into explaining what would happen next. She pressed him, her voice a mix of seduction and desperation. "Now that your wife knows, are you finally going to leave her?" Christopher was in no mood for a dramatic conversation. He was still in shock, grappling with guilt and fear about the fallout. "It's complicated," he muttered, the same refrain he had used on Emily. Vanessa's frustration flared. "You keep saying that," she spat. "What does that even mean? You brought me into your house. Did you think you could hide me forever?" Christopher groaned, running a hand across his face. "I didn't plan for this. Emily wasn't supposed to come home so soon." Vanessa crossed her arms, feeling a stab of rage. She had risked her reputation and pinned her hopes on Christopher, only to find him dithering. "Are you still trying to save your marriage? Because that's not going to happen. She knows everything now." He shot her a warning look. "You have no idea what Emily and I have been through. Our marriage is more than just." She cut him off, voice as sharp as broken glass. "Clearly, it wasn't enough to keep you faithful." Silence followed. Christopher sank into an armchair, burying his face in his hands. Vanessa stood by the window, arms folded, her mind racing. She wasn't the type to sit on the sidelines and wait. She needed a plan. "I'm not going to be a dirty little secret anymore," Vanessa said finally. "If you're going to make this serious, then I expect you to leave her. Otherwise, I'll walk away, and you can sort out your broken marriage alone." Christopher looked up, conflict etched into his features. "This isn't just about leaving her. We have assets, a reputation, a life that's intertwined. Divorces among people like us aren't straightforward. Emily is loved by the public. If this becomes scandalous, my business could suffer." Vanessa's lips twisted in disdain. "So your primary concern is money and image? That's not fair," he shot back. "Do you think I built Morgan Capital Investments just to watch it crumble over a tabloid scandal?" Vanessa softened her tone, realizing she needed a strategic approach. "No, of course not," she purred, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But I need clarity, Christopher. I need to know you won't just run back to her when things get tough." He took a deep breath and turned to look at her. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, "but I do know that something died between Emily and me a long time ago. Let me speak to my lawyers, figure out the best way to handle this. Then I'll make a decision." Vanessa exhaled, partially satisfied. She knew that if she pushed too hard, he might recoil. For now, she would give him space to manage the fallout. But in her heart, she vowed that she would not remain a second option. She was determined to secure her position in Christopher's life, even if it meant shattering the pieces of his old one beyond repair. Word traveled fast among the social elite. By the next day, rumors circulated that the Morgans were on the brink of a scandalous split. The tabloids had not yet published anything concrete, but society gossip was fueling speculation that Christopher had been caught red-handed with another woman. Beatrice Williams finally returned Emily's call and rushed to the mansion. She found Emily in the study, staring blankly at a pile of Christopher's documents. The sadness in Emily's eyes was almost too much for Beatrice to bear. "Emily, my darling," Beatrice said, rushing to her side. She wrapped Emily in a comforting embrace. "I'm so sorry." Emily's composure cracked. Tears welled up once more, and she buried her face in Beatrice's shoulder. "I was so blind," she murmured between sobs. Beatrice stroked Emily's hair. "No, you were loving and trusting, two things that wretch took advantage of." Pulling back, Emily wiped her eyes. "I don't know what to do. I feel so lost." Beatrice took a seat next to her, eyeing the scattered documents. "First, You need a lawyer, a good one. Have you spoken to your family? Your father, Henry Harrington, still holds influence in legal circles, doesn't he? Emily nodded weakly. I thought about calling him, but I'm not ready for the pity and the "I told you so." Beatrice pressed her hand gently. You need support more than ever right now. This is not your fault. Don't let guilt keep you from leaning on the people who love you. Sighing, Emily nodded. You're right. I'll call him. Meanwhile, Christopher was back in his penthouse, making calls of his own. He contacted his lawyer, Jonathan Carter, to discuss potential strategies. Carter was pragmatic and blunt. Christopher, if you want to avoid a tabloid feeding frenzy, you'll need to be proactive. Emily's philanthropic work has made her a darling to the public. Any hint that you wronged her will not go well for your reputation or for Morgan Capital. Christopher rubbed his temples. What are my options? Carter outlined scenarios ranging from amicable settlement to contested divorce. The biggest concern is the narrative. If Emily comes out as the scorned wife and you as the adulterer, it could hurt your business deals, especially those reliant on public goodwill. Christopher felt his stomach churn. He knew the magnitude of what he stood to lose. So what do I do? Carter let out a heavy breath. Damage control. Issue a public statement, or try to reconcile quietly, though I'm guessing that ship may have sailed. Alternatively, you could try to persuade Emily to keep this under wraps, but that would likely require major concessions in a settlement. As the day wore on, a silent battle began forming between Emily's allies and Christopher's. Emily had the moral high ground and the sympathy of many. Christopher had money, influence, and the survival instinct of a man who had never lost. Vanessa, for her part, was an unknown wildcard. While Christopher and Emily had entire networks behind them, Vanessa relied solely on Christopher's favor. She hired a public relations consultant on the sly, just in case. She was determined not to be labeled simply as the homewrecker. She wanted the public, if this went public, to see her as someone who had fallen in love, not some scheming opportunist. Yet behind all the maneuvers and strategies lay a deeper emotional truth. No matter how the scandal was spun, a marriage had been torn apart. Emily faced the prospect of an uncertain future. Christopher wrestled with guilt and confusion, and Vanessa cast her gaze on the prize she still hoped to claim. Emily mustered the courage to call her father, Henry Harrington. Henry was an astute businessman turned philanthropist, with enough connections in the legal world to assemble the best team for his daughter. He listened quietly to Emily's tearful account of Christopher's betrayal. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "I always respected Christopher for his ambition, but I did warn you that he seemed too driven by success. I had hoped I was wrong." Emily sighed, recalling the many times her father had gently hinted that Christopher's single-minded focus on career might overshadow personal relationships. "You saw the signs," she admitted. "I didn't want to." Henry's voice was gentle but resolute. "We'll handle this. You focus on taking care of yourself. I'll set up a meeting with a top divorce attorney, somebody discreet. We'll figure out the financial details later." Despite everything, Emily found comfort in her father's assured tone. She agreed to meet with the attorney, feeling a sliver of relief that she wouldn't have to navigate this alone. Meanwhile, Christopher made a desperate attempt to bridge the gap with Emily by sending her a text message. "We need to talk. I'm sorry. Please, let's figure this out without everyone getting hurt." Emily stared at the message, torn between rage and the lingering love she once felt. She replied curtly, "My lawyer will be in touch." That evening, she invited her father over to the mansion. When Henry arrived, she could see the sadness in his eyes as he took in the disarray, the scattered documents, the half-packed suitcases. He held Emily in a tight embrace. "We'll get through this," he promised. They discussed financial aspects. Henry reasoned that Emily was entitled to a significant portion of the estate. However, Emily's concerns extended beyond money. She wanted emotional closure, a sense of justice, and a path to rebuild her life. You know, Henry mused, you could also leverage the media if you want. Christopher is worried about his business. Perhaps he'd agree to favorable terms to keep everything quiet. Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm not sure if I have the stomach for a public battle. But I also don't want him to walk away unscathed. Henry nodded. It's your decision. Just know that I'll stand by you, no matter what. As she prepared for bed, Emily felt a jarring mix of heartbreak, anger, and a strange kind of resolve. She realized that part of her still yearned for Christopher's arms to wrap around her, whispering that it was all a bad dream. But that possibility seemed remote. She was a woman wronged, and the comforting illusions had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw determination to reclaim her life. A few days later, after a flurry of phone calls between lawyers, Christopher and Emily agreed to meet in a neutral location, an upscale law office in Manhattan with panoramic views of the skyline. Henry accompanied Emily, while Christopher came alone. Vanessa's name was not listed among the attendees, much to Emily's relief. The tension in the glass-walled conference room was palpable. Emily sat across from Christopher, her gaze unwavering. He looked tired, the lines of stress etched into his face. Jonathan Carter, Christopher's lawyer, began with a formal greeting. Emily's attorney, Victoria Nguyen, nodded in acknowledgement. The conversation started politely but quickly delved into uncomfortable territory: finances, properties, investments. With each new revelation of Christopher's hidden expenditures, gifts to Vanessa, trips, and so forth, Emily's hurt and anger swelled. Finally, they reached the topic of infidelity. Victoria Nguyen spoke with measured calm. Miss S. Morgan would like a full confession of the length and extent of your affair. It affects the emotional distress component of any settlement. Christopher avoided Emily's gaze. It started about 6 months ago. We met at a charity event. Emily took a sharp breath. 6 months? She recalled the nights he had come home late, the moments he had brushed off her concerns. It stung more deeply than she had anticipated. How serious is this affair? Victoria pressed. Christopher's eyes flickered with guilt. I don't know. We never discussed long-term commitments. It just happened. Silence draped over the table. Emily felt tears pricking her eyes. It didn't just happen, Christopher, she said, voice trembling. You made choices over and over again. Christopher finally looked at her, his voice laden with regret. I'm sorry, Emily. I never wanted to hurt you. Things. They changed between us. You were busy with your charities, and I felt... Emily's expression hardened. Don't you dare blame my philanthropy for your betrayal. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The lawyers exchanged glances, aware that emotional entanglements were complicating the negotiations. Jonathan Carter cleared his throat. Let's keep this civil. Both parties stand to lose if this goes public in a messy way. Emily mustered her composure. I want the house, she said. It's been my home for years. I also want a fair share of the assets. I won't be left empty-handed after everything I've put into this marriage. Christopher's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine, we can discuss the details. As the negotiation continued, it became clear that Emily wasn't solely driven by revenge. She wanted closure, dignity, and a chance to move forward. Christopher, on the other hand, wanted to preserve as much of his empire as possible. When they reached an impasse on certain points, Henry stepped in. Christopher, I've watched you build your business from nothing, and I admired that. But you owe Emily the respect and resources to rebuild her life. Make this easier on her, and you'll both come out better in the end. Christopher sighed. All right. Let's finalize an agreement that covers Emily's share. I just want this resolved quietly. They set a follow-up meeting to hammer out final details, but a sense of unease lingered. Emily left the room feeling a strange combination of empowerment and devastation. She was fighting for her rights, but she couldn't ignore the shattered remains of what was once her marriage. Meanwhile, Vanessa grew impatient. She hadn't heard much from Christopher about how the negotiations were going. She feared he might waver, especially if guilt pushed him to reconcile with Emily. Determined to secure her place, Vanessa took a bold step. She arranged a secret meeting with a tabloid journalist, Nicole Ramirez, known for her sensational exposes on the wealthy and powerful. If Christopher wouldn't commit to her, Vanessa had a backup plan: public attention. She fed Nicole carefully curated details, snippets of text messages, pictures of her and Christopher together, even a clandestine snapshot from inside the Morgan mansion. Vanessa calculated that once the story broke, Christopher would be forced to acknowledge her publicly, perhaps even expedite his divorce. She made it clear to Nicole she didn't want her name dragged through the mud. She wanted the story spun in a way that suggested Emily and Christopher had been estranged long before Vanessa entered the picture. Nicole nodded thoughtfully, scribbling in her notepad. "You're sure about this? Once it's out there, you can't take it back." Vanessa's eyes glittered with resolve. "I'm sure. Make it sensational enough to grab headlines, but not so much that I come off as a predator." Nicole smirked. "Got it. Consider it done." With that, Vanessa left the meeting feeling a rush of adrenaline. She believed she was taking control of the narrative, ensuring she wasn't cast aside. Little did she realize she was igniting a firestorm that would engulf all three of them. A week later, headlines erupted: "Millionaire mogul caught in scandalous affair, wife blindsided, Mistress speaks out." The tabloids splashed Vanessa's photos, some of which had been taken in the Morgan mansion. They hinted that Emily Morgan had been neglectful, absorbed in her charities, leaving Christopher lonely and vulnerable. Emily discovered the article early in the morning, brought to her attention by a horrified staff member. She read in disbelief as Vanessa was painted as a misunderstood figure, someone who fell for a man who claimed he was trapped in an unhappy marriage. Fury burned through Emily. She called Christopher, her voice trembling with rage. "Is this your doing? Are you blaming me for your infidelity?" Christopher, equally blindsided, was frantically calling his PR team. "I had nothing to do with this," he insisted. "Vanessa must have gone to the press on her own. I swear." Emily couldn't decide whether to believe him. "She has photos from inside our house." "Christopher, how could you let this happen?" Christopher grimaced. "I didn't plan this. Look, my PR team is working on a statement to refute the lies about you." But Emily wasn't soothed. "This is humiliating," she cried. "My reputation, my charities, everything is tainted by your scandal." Christopher's panic bled into anger at Vanessa. He dialed her number repeatedly, but she let it go to voicemail. Realizing he had been outmaneuvered, he cursed himself for underestimating her ambition. Now he was caught between protecting his business image and the meltdown of his personal life. Lawyers scrambled to contain the damage. The hush-hush divorce proceedings were now thrown into the public arena, fueling gossip columns and talk shows. Public sympathy largely swung toward Emily, who was depicted as the wounded philanthropist wife. Vanessa's attempt to shift blame only partially succeeded. While some tabloids portrayed her sympathetically, many condemned her as a gold-digging opportunist. For Emily, the fallout was emotionally draining. She received an outpouring of support from friends, donors, and even strangers who admired her charitable work. Yet the intrusive questions, paparazzi outside the mansion gates, and constant media calls left her feeling cornered. One evening, as Emily sat in her bedroom reviewing statements from her lawyer, she realized how broken she felt. Despite public sympathy, her heart ached from betrayal, the violation of her marital sanctuary, and the sense that her life had become a spectacle. She stared at her wedding photo herself, and Christopher, radiant with love. Now, that moment felt like a different lifetime. Consumed by guilt and rage, Christopher confronted Vanessa in the penthouse. He burst through the door, ignoring her startled expression. "What the hell did you do?" He bellowed, voice echoing off the high ceilings. Vanessa, feigning innocence, folded her arms. "I just told my side of the story. Your side of the story too, if you recall. The press was going to find out anyway." Christopher's eyes blazed. "You never consulted me. Now the negotiations are jeopardized. Emily is furious. My business is suffering. Potential partners are pulling out of deals because they don't want their names associated with a scandal." Vanessa sneered. "You're blaming me for your decisions. You promised me a future, Christopher. I won't be pushed aside." He slammed his palm onto a nearby table, making her jump. "You could have ruined everything." She shot back. "Maybe you should have thought of that before cheating on your wife. Or before parading me around your mansion." Silence clung to the air like a thundercloud on the verge of breaking. Christopher's rage simmered, but beneath it he felt the hollow pang of regret. He realized that in his quest for excitement he had courted a disaster that might consume his entire life. Clenching his jaw, Christopher spoke through gritted teeth. "I'm dealing with the fallout. You stay away from the media. No more interviews. Understood?" Vanessa lifted her chin defiantly. "And if I don't?" His eyes narrowed. "Then you can forget any kind of future with me." She let out a bitter laugh. "Is that supposed to scare me? Because I can just as easily sell more stories to the highest bidder." "Do not threaten me, Christopher. I know things about you, business secrets that could topple Morgan Capital." A tense standoff ensued, each grasping for control in a situation that spiraled beyond either's command. Finally, Christopher stormed out, leaving Vanessa trembling with a mix of fear, anger, and something else, an undeniable sense of triumph. She believed she had gained the upper hand, but in truth, all their illusions were unraveling fast. In the days that followed, Emily found herself at a crossroads. The scandal's intensity began to subside, replaced by the more pressing question, what now? The divorce was still in motion, but the emotional toll weighed heavily on her. She sought solace in her charitable work, pouring her heartbreak into a new pediatric wing at a local hospital. The outpouring of donations, inspired by her plight, reminded her that something good could emerge from her personal tragedy. Her father, Henry, urged her to finalize the divorce quickly. "Don't let him drag this out," he advised. "The sooner you close this chapter, the sooner you can start anew." Meanwhile, Beatrice arranged a small gathering at her home for a few close friends, hoping it would lift Emily's spirits. Surrounded by people who cared for her, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. They shared stories, laughter, and empathized with her heartbreak. Over a glass of sparkling water, Emily realized she was stronger than she had once believed. On the legal front, Christopher, battered by bad press and diminishing business deals, became increasingly eager to reach a settlement. He offered Emily the mansion, a significant financial settlement, and the condition of confidentiality about certain aspects of their relationship to protect what remained of his reputation. Emily pondered these terms. She wanted justice, but she also wanted peace. In a private meeting with her lawyer, she asked, "If I take this settlement, will it look like I'm letting him get away with everything?" Victoria Nguyen gave her a thoughtful look. "It's not about letting him off the hook. You have a life to live beyond this scandal. Dragging it out in court could mean more pain, more media attention. Sometimes the best victory is moving on with your dignity and resources intact." Emily closed her eyes, imagining a future free from the mansion's haunted corridors, free from gossip columns, and free from Christopher's lies. Yet she also felt a pang of nostalgia for the marriage she once cherished. Negotiations culminated in one last tense meeting. This time, it was held in Emily's mansion, her mansion, since the property transfer was all but official. Christopher arrived alone, subdued and tentative, aware that he was no longer master of this domain. They sat across from each other in the grand living room, a space that had once hosted elegant parties. Now it was a battleground of broken hearts. Christopher spoke first. "Thank you for meeting me." Emily regarded him carefully, her posture poised. "We have to finalize the settlement. Let's get it done," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Emily, I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I truly regret how I hurt you. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I will always—" She cut him off, her voice quiet but firm. "You forfeited the right to speak about forever when you brought another woman into our home." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I understand. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I just hope in time you'll find peace." The conversation shifted to logistical details, bank accounts, assets, the confidentiality clause. Emily insisted on a clause that would prevent Christopher and Vanessa from further defaming her. He, in turn, requested that she not publicly disclose the specifics of his business dealings or personal failings beyond the public knowledge. After they hashed out the final terms, Christopher stood, offering a handshake. Emily regarded his outstretched hand as though it were a relic of a past life. She took it, only briefly, and felt a surge of memories, both cherished and painful. "You take care, Emily," he whispered. Then he left, footsteps echoing down the hallway. In the silence that followed, Emily sank onto the sofa. A swirl of relief, sorrow, and strange exhilaration filled her. The final confrontation had come and gone, and she had survived it. Maybe she had even grown stronger because of it. With the settlement signed, Emily legally reclaimed her maiden name, Emily Harrington, to symbolize the fresh start she was determined to make. She held a quiet press conference to discuss her new charity initiatives, making only a brief statement about her personal situation. "I appreciate the support and ask for privacy as I move forward." The dignity and grace of her statement earned her even more public admiration. Christopher attempted to rehabilitate his image through a series of business moves and charitable donations, but the taint of scandal lingered. Investors remained skittish. Vanessa, once believing she would ascend to social prominence, found her reputation in tatters. She tried to cling to Christopher, but he gradually distanced himself, resentful of her role in fueling the scandal. In a last-ditch move, Vanessa threatened more tabloid reveals, but Christopher's legal team intervened, silencing her with a settlement that was far less than she had hoped for. The Morgan mansion, now back in Emily's possession, became the site of something remarkable. She decided to transform part of it into a wellness center for women going through emotional and financial hardships. She couldn't stand living in the same space that carried so many painful memories, so she turned her heartbreak into a mission to help others heal. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Henry Harrington stood proudly by her side, along with Beatrice Williams and a host of supporters. Cameras flashed, capturing Emily's radiant smile. In her speech, she said, "We all go through chapters of brokenness, but brokenness can be a catalyst for change, a stepping stone to something bigger and better." In that moment, Emily felt a sense of closure. She had transformed her pain into purpose. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy her had, in a strange twist, become the foundation of a new life, one built on resilience, compassion, and an unbreakable spirit. In the end, Emily Harrington turned betrayal into triumph, channeling heartbreak into a powerful cause that helped countless women find hope amid their darkest hours. The mansion that once symbolized her shattered dreams blossomed into a haven of renewal. Meanwhile, Christopher faced the fallout of his choices, and Vanessa discovered that ambition fueled by deceit offers only fleeting rewards. This story proves that even in the midst of scandal, resilience can prevail. Emily's journey reminds us that dignity, self-discovery, and compassion can arise from the ashes of heartbreak. Thank you for joining us for this dramatic tale of wealth, secrets, and redemption. If you found yourself captivated by these twists and turns, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more gripping stories to life and allows us to continue exploring the human emotions that connect us all. Stay tuned for our next adventure.